All right, I'd officially like to welcome everybody to our Wednesday webinar. My name is John Langley. I'm on the executive board for IDEA. We'd like to welcome the Edmentum team today. They're going to talk to us about enhancing extended learning with Edmentum, maximize your students' gains. We're here today with Craig Twaddle, Rachel Bagden, Casey Stone, and Jason Eggert. Go ahead and turn it over to Casey and hope everybody enjoys.
Thank you very much, John. I'm Casey of the team that John just announced. We represent Edmentum, and we're going to talk today about a number of different ways that schools are communicating with us regarding extending learning for students, both outside of the school day, inside of the school day. But all four of us are going to have a conversation around it because we want it to be casual. We want you to pipe in questions or ideas into chat. Jason will be monitoring those. We want it to be a robust conversation around supporting students as individuals, making sure that all students are experiencing gains. We're going to use the word spring today to go into the next slide as we go through different pieces of the conversation. But at the end, we'll have some resources for you as well. So let's go ahead and spring. And here we are. Just go over this pretty quickly, just so you know who we are and who you're speaking with today. I'm Casey, the bald one on the right side of your screen there. But this is, aside from me, a distinguished team that has a lot of years experience in the education sector, from teachers, administrators, all the way up into supporting schools at national levels as well. So you're going to hear from each one of us, but take a peek there in purple underneath each of our email addresses. Those are our Twitter handles too. We're all pretty active on Twitter and would love for you to follow us. We'll follow back and we can get some dialogue going outside of today's conversation as well. As Jason springs to the next one, I did mention that we've all had various roles in both schools and supporting schools as well. So when you have four heads to collaborate around supporting schools, you get a lot of varied experiences. And that's what we want today to really center around is questions that we have heard, experiences and success stories that have emanated from those question and answering series. And just maybe you can see a bit of your students and yourselves and your schools in the conversation today. This is a brief overview of our agenda. We have kind of touched on the introductions, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Edmentum, not belabor you with that, but just so you know why we're here today and what we represent. So let's hit spring for us again, Jason. So Edmentum is a long word, but that's because we are a large collection of services for schools. Let's go ahead and hit that spring a couple times just so it fills the screen out for you. One of them is digital curriculum. We have an array of curricular resources we serve learners from pre-K all the way up to higher education, all sorts of different subjects. So you might know us from that sector. But we're also in supportive of assessments. Those are both adaptive and norm referenced assessment series for baselining and benchmarking students. But then also we're in there to help with criterion reference. Those are those standard-based assessments too. So we do all those. And then as a connector of all those pieces, we do managed services and consulting, which is what all four of us do on a regular basis. So we're here today to kind of bring those experiences again into a collective conversation. Spring, pretty please. Okay, this is a bit dated. We've experienced a lot of growth in Illinois in the past year and a half, and so these numbers aren't fully up to date, partially because at the bottom of that screen, you see that letter E, and then you see the Apex Learning logo. You may know this, maybe you don't, that those two companies merged together around a year ago. So the partners and districts supported across the state is almost doubled sheerly through that. Then also the partnerships have grown just because we've had success stories that we can bring to the table, and folks always want to replicate success. So if we're not in your district, we're probably in the district right next to yours as well. Spring, please. Okay, So we're getting into the why now. Why are we here today? Why are we having this conversation around student learning? Okay, I'm not going to read the full graph for us, but as you look through it and as I'm speaking, you know this as well as anybody, that students are not scoring quite as well as they had on standardized assessments, whether they're normed or criterion referenced, than they did in earlier years. Okay, there's a whole host of factors for that, but the factors are almost moot at this point because we're in a scenario where we need to grow them back up to where we would prefer they be. And what caused it is really not that important. It's more about what can we do to right the ship or to make a positive impact in each individual student's lives, both in reading and in math, in other subjects as well. And so that's what we're really getting into, is seeing students as individuals, students with like needs as groups, and making sure that all groups have what they need to get the learning to make them successful. Spring, okay? So a big piece of that conversation is low ratio time. This slide doesn't have a ton on it, so I'm going to go ahead and say spring on it and kind of flesh this term out. This visual here is designed to represent the themes of the conversations that Rachel, Jason, Craig, and I have with schools up and down the state. We hear them all the time mention that they want more data, but reduce the testing. And then there's a crux of hiring people. Maybe they have a need to hire, but in certain subjects, there's just not a high volume of people out there to hire. But they always get to a conversation around, we need more time with students as individuals or into those targeted small groups, okay? That is that is the low ratio time that we are referencing. You may have already known that, but I just wanted to consolidate that into a statement for you. So that's what we're looking at here. More low ratio time to support students as individuals and groups of similar need. So spring for me, Jason, please. Okay, now on this visual right here, what we really want to convey is that anything outside of whole group instruction is lower ratio, but we're going to get into lower still ratios because that's where the research is really hitting on. But for this first visual, just to prime your brain, think about any time of learning outside of whole class or whole group as a lowered ratio, okay? Don't just take my word for it either. There are a host of research pieces out there for you. This one particular one comes from Methods in Schools, that you'll see these bullet points come out as byproducts of utilizing lower ratio learning times throughout the week. Now, on that middle visual right there, there's some examples. Not every student needs all of them, okay? Not every school or after-school program or summer school program or online learning program can institute all of them, but we wanted to present to you a menu of some different types of ways that we've seen our partners get to those low ratio minutes, okay? i.e., I can get a lower ratio with the teacher if I have some students doing partner reading time. You work on your reading and I'm going to work with these students over here. That's one way to get it done. But we'll cover some more on it. I did put in there the universal symbol for small group learning, that U-shaped table. I put that there on the left-hand side. I thought all my educators would appreciate that little inside joke of educators, if you will. Spring, please, Jason. Continuing that thought, I wanted to get into some best practices, okay? This could be a whole webinar around best practices in low ratio learning time. But to kind of cut to the chase, this particular research comes from Ed Labs, okay? And in it had these specific best practices for ratios for primary grades, students 2nd grade to 5th grade, and then secondary students, okay? Now, maybe you have the capacity in your employees to get to that. Most schools that I'm seeing now don't have enough teachers to get to these ratios with their students in 2023. So they're looking for creative ways to get to that, okay? But the research out of this study, and then another one that I added in the resources slide at the very end, echo each other, that these ratios of 1 to 3, 1 to 4 for older students, and then lower than 1 to 3, all the way down to 1 to 1 for early literacy students particularly, is where you'll have the highest rates of success. Spring pretty please, Jason. On that note, the reasons why that you'll have greater success at those ratios are these here in blue. This comes from yet another study. This is from a higher education review board as well. But in it, it points out that in those low ratio interactions, yes, of course, they get more individualized attention, the learners do. They tend to participate more when they don't feel like their voice is being drowned out. If it's 3 students, 3 fourth graders, let's say, they're more likely to interact with the teacher and one another when there is that smaller quantity. You'll see an increase in student relationship with the teacher, trust factor type pieces within there. And then the last one there being socialization opportunities as well. And that's connected to participation, but it also is back to that point I was making about speaking with other students and collaborating with them as well. Okay, so before I pass my baton, I was going to just give some examples. I've given some different age ranges. Some of the implementations that I have seen be successful, I'll go in the middle. I'll go to a middle school type implementation. Okay, so some schools will call it a win time, what I need time. Others might call it something based around their mascot, like Tiger Time or something of that nature. But there might be section of minutes throughout the day, say 30 minutes throughout the day, where students are going to be put into a physical space to receive information or do activities that are specific to them. But in the middle school example that I'm going with, in that win time, they were able to get small group or targeted instruction based on student groups' needs. So the gifted and talented groups could have some activities to enrich their learning. The students who had tier 3 needs in reading would get targeted instruction on that. The students who had tier 2 gaps in math would get that, ELs as well. But the idea is during that what I need time or that Tiger time, that they would be then grouped by like need and be getting like low ratio targeted activities. Okay, I'm going to say spring and then pass my baton to him.
Casey wanted to, there was a question that came from Rebecca asking, can this be the concept of low ratio time? Can it be adapted to adult learners?
Yes. In fact, this research that we're looking at on this particular screen comes from the higher education review. So in my collection of research that I attributed these visuals to, I tried to span grade levels. But yes, for adult learners, those ratios can be stretched a bit. You can get up to say a 1 to 6, but the 1 to 4, 1 to 6 tends to be the sweet spot for secondary students and adult learners. Final thought, I forgot about this visual, so I'm glad you brought it up. This particular view just demonstrates that in 2023, the power of the internet means that a way to be creative, to get low ratio learning times, is to utilize a virtual station, if you want to think of it that way, a virtual time, a virtual station, a virtual activity center, what have you. But this can be a support to your employees to help them have more capacity to reach students by allowing certain minutes or certain times of the week that they go and log into an interface where they would be getting that low ratio interaction. So on that left-hand picture, you're seeing a tutor or a teacher speaking with that secondary student or that adult learner to do the low ratio or the targeted instruction or targeted tutoring for them, okay? But that can be ongoing during other things, such as that win time that I mentioned, okay? So thank you, Jason, for slowing me down to remember this, and spring.
Thanks, Casey. Hello, everybody. So it'll kind of dovetail into what Casey was talking about. One of the most common questions we get here at Edmentum when really talking about implementation ideas for intervention or enrichment is, and again, alluding to the three questions that were brought up earlier, was, how can I get more time working on individual needs during the school day without losing other instructional time? Spring? So this is a question for the group, and you can throw it into chat. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have either recently made changes to your bell schedule or are considering making changes? And this is just more of a curiosity. Feel free to throw it in chat if any of you are. But we know that research-based instructional practices paired with digital tools, like tools from Edmentum, are really a critical piece to any successful intervention. But effective strategies around time can also maximize those learning opportunities and really demonstrate improved outcomes. So what I'm going to go through on the next few slides are some different implementation models for leveraging time for intervention or enrichment. Spring, please. So most of us are familiar with the station rotation model in an elementary school. There's typically more flexibility within the day for dedicated time to focus on intervention and enrichment. However, at the secondary level, the increased need for more individual support, as we addressed earlier, there's really tremendous potential to leverage time as a creative strategy to reach those goals. Spring, please. So for middle and high schools with a traditional 45-minute period daily schedule, this is just one example of how one day per week could be repurposed for small group work. Now, we know that this approach won't work in every classroom, so let's take a look at a possible second option. Spring? So if you have a designated intervention block, so this could be a repurposed study hall, or as Casey mentioned, a win time area, this model can fit really nicely into a rotation model. So I'll use our local school district here in Grays Lake as an example. Last year, we went from a traditional 45 8-period schedule to an AB block schedule. And one of the strategies behind this was to create more time for intervention and enrichment for students. This is really the most frequently used approach that we see in secondary classrooms who are using ExactPath, but there are variations to this that that might work well as well. Spring, please. So here's just kind of an idea of how this, from a visual standpoint. So, either the models that I shared in the previous two slides, all students are working on individualized learning paths while students rotate in and out of the small group led by the teacher. So two things to keep in mind with this approach. Obviously, this only works if you have a classroom set of devices or are one-to-one. I think, post-pandemic, I think a lot of districts accelerated their plans for getting devices in the hands of students. So we've seen the benefits of that. But then also setting expectations with students for what they should be working on during that independent time. Spring, please. So there are a lot of fantastic resources out there that provide real-world examples of innovative ways to think about the use of time during the school day. One of the sites I'm referencing here, unlockingtime.org. This site actually allows you to build various bell scheduling scenarios, has a ton of examples of real use cases at elementary and secondary levels in both the public and private schools. So hopefully this has given you some food for thought about ways to leverage time inside the school day. Next, we're going to share some examples of time leveraged outside the school day. And get Spring.
Thank you, Craig. Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Bagden with Edmentum. Thank you again so much for your time this afternoon. to add to Craig's point about unlocking time, maximizing time with students outside of the school day can also help improve academic achievement. Spring. Before we dive into different strategies, we'd love to hear from all of you. How is your district utilizing before or after school time as a lever to increase academic achievement, and how is it working? We'll wait a minute or two. See what the group says.
You can feel free to come off of mute, or I've been monitoring the chat here. I did enter a line there. Jeanette says, depends on the school. Ours does a robotics and science club with a focus on problem solving. Thank you, Jeanette, for sharing that. Amanda is just chatted in. My school has a mandatory tutoring program at lunch for those who are considered socially ineligible. Many kids skip it, though, unfortunately. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing that. Amanda, maybe if you want to, if you feel comfortable coming off of mute, you mentioned socially ineligible. Tell me, or tell us what you mean by that.
Hi, everyone. I'm
Hi,
muted
Amanda.
because I'm a little stuffy, so I apologize if I sound very nasally.
No worries.
So my school it runs a report every week, and if you are failing 2 or more classes and you're considered socially ineligible, you don't get to leave campus for lunch. You don't get to participate in any sports, any extracurricular activities, and then you have to go to this mandatory tutoring. And unfortunately, we've just seen that so many kids don't care. They'll leave anyways and don't go to tutoring, and just seems that it's not it sounded like it started as a good program, but it doesn't seem to be fixing the problems.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. And I'm thinking you work with high school students?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Amanda. We have another chat that came in from Rebecca. We have before and after school tutors for homework at our schools. We also have a chat from Mrs. Ketchmark Liska. My school has focused after school tutoring for math and ELA. Few students consistently attend. Really appreciate everyone chatting in their thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Spring. So as we have seen even in the chat, having a tutoring program doesn't mean it necessarily works. It takes the right people, the right program, the right strategy, and every school is different. And so I'm going to share a story about a way in which we worked with a community partner to help develop their tutoring program. And then I'll share some of the tools that we have used with districts and at Edmentum to help make tutoring time more valuable and support districts. So recently, we started partnering with the State Alliance of Tennessee Boys and Girls Clubs. And what we saw is that they had a large need to help districts in their area with academic growth, because after COVID and after staffing shortages, their districts were coming to them saying, what can you do to support us? Because right now we need help. Our kids have a lot to catch up on. They're fully capable, but we need the best people. We need some strategies. And so our Edmentum team, not only do we provide curriculum, but we also provide coaching and we provide tutoring. But in this case, with the Boys and Girls Clubs in Tennessee, we provided them with a personalized learning platform, and it's K through 12 math and ELA. And what's unique about this platform is that it provides direct instruction at a student's level, but it also is developmentally appropriate. So if you have high school students who are working on personalized learning, they're not going to see a platform that looks like it should be for elementary school students, even if they are far below grade level. And so the content is really, really engaging. And so that was one piece. We helped the organization utilize their own tutors. So they had their own live staff. They didn't use our tutors, but we helped them develop their own plan for how to use their tutoring. And some of the things they thought about were the tutors have to be consistent, because we think about tutoring also as a form of mentoring. If it's done well and it's done right, then students should want to go and they should have a mentorship type of capacity with the tutor. But that only happens if it's well planned and if it's structured and consistent. And so what we saw with this partnership is in only 7 weeks, we saw 6 to 7 months of academic growth. And we see partnerships like this all throughout the country. I think what is so exciting for us is seeing how we don't necessarily just have to rely on during the school day or even in a school building to help students grow. It really does take a village, and you have partners in the community and you also have us. And so although it might be hard for a Boys and Girls Club organization to do this all on their own, when they have an education partner that can equip them with the right programming and coaching to help them use the staff that they have, then we can see results. Spring.
Rachel, real quick before I spring ahead to the next slide, there was a question from Jeanette that came through on the chat.
Oh, yes.
Was the growth maintained for the students?
Yes. So the partnership is even becoming better and better. And so, yeah, what we're seeing is it was so successful that now we're finding Boys and Girls Club Alliance adoptions with Edmentum throughout the country. So we also primarily work with school districts to provide them with virtual live teachers. And there's two parts of this that have made it different than other companies or different than other programs out there. The first thing is that personalized learning platform we mentioned. It only takes 40 minutes a week for any student. So if they're on grade level, they need to get above grade level, or if they're far multiple years below grade level, they still just need 40 minutes a week. So it's an easy 10 minutes, 4 days a week. They can use the platform if they get to school early and they're waiting before they come into their first class for the day, or after school if they're waiting for their bus, or in between time if they get finished with something early. And so what we know is when you have the right program that provides direct instruction and it's developmentally appropriate, and it doesn't take a lot of time to devote to it, we see students really, really like it, and we also see the growth. So that was one big piece, was having the right learning tool. Spring. And what it looks like in a tutoring capacity, whether your teachers are virtual live, whether they are in person, every student has their own learning path. So students K through 12, even if you have a range of different grade levels or ability levels in your after school group, they can all be working on their exact path personalized learning platform for just 10 minutes a day. Teachers could also assign content from their grade level standards, and they can see how long students have been working within the platform. And so this is a really good way for staff to monitor, yet provide students with instruction based on their current levels, because a lot of times after school or before school staff may not necessarily be qualified to teach pre-calculus or to teach 8th grade science. And so it just depends. And so it's really important to have a program there to support you, because we want to make sure that we can help students grow as much as possible. And it's very, very simple to use with the right program and having the right partner to help you develop the program that you want to offer, and the way in which you utilize your teachers or tutors. Spring. And spring. So a lot of districts, especially in the last few years, have adopted different personalized learning platforms out there. Does anyone have an example of how you've seen the district use the personalized learning platform when it's not regular classroom instruction time? So if you have seen it, would you mind typing that in the chat and tell us what you've seen and how it's worked?
I'll go ahead and add a line here to the chat box.
And it's possible that not every district has used this approach yet, but a lot of us have these platforms that are already used in math, ELA, science, and social studies already. And they can be adapted to be used outside of class time too, especially if you have one that includes direct instruction so students can learn on their own. So if you don't, we should talk because we have one that's wonderful, but just let me know. All right, Spring. So we briefly talked about how Edmentum has virtual live tutors. And so in the example with the Tennessee Boys and Girls Club State Alliance, they use their own teachers and they use their own tutors, excuse me. And we also have a virtual live tutoring option. And so it can be done during the school day, before school, after school, or in the comfort of a student's home. So during the summer, if students are wanting to close gaps and get back on grade level or get ahead, let's say they have some credit recovery to do, or let's say they want to prepare for SAT or ACT, our virtual tutors can work with them and they can use Edmentum programming to do that. So they can do it at home. So there's a lot of different ways that we can be flexible to meet needs of districts. And with that, I will pass it to my colleague to talk about summer school. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you. We're here at the caboose. I'm on the caboose. I've got part 4 here. As I mentioned in the chat earlier, we were coming today with 4 items for you to consider as far as extending learning, enhancing learning for your students. Casey started out by talking a little bit about this concept of low ratio time. And I would even say that as Craig talked about creative scheduling, and Rachel is talking about before and after school, really this idea of low ratio time has found its way into really all of our other tips or options that we're talking about here today. Really the idea of getting as much of that low ratio time with students as possible to really have a high impact. Casey, I'm going to pass along the chat monitoring baton to you, if you don't mind. And since I'm driving the slideshow, I don't need to say spring, although I think I'll say spring anyway, just because I think that's fun. All right, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about summer programming. Believe it or not, we're in April, and in some places here across the state of Illinois, the weather is turning, although I will say today here, I live up in Crystal Lake, so I'm dangerously close to the Wisconsin border up here, and it's a little chilly, but I think a little further south, a little bit warmer. All of that being said, we're starting to think about summer, and I'm sure that you've already been talking with your teams about what summer program could look like. What I would encourage you to do, if you have not already done so already, is to define what you would like the goal or the goals of that summer program to be. Once you've identified those goals, require the students and their families to commit to those goals. They might be very much individual goals. They might be more programmatic goals. They might be bigger picture goals. But the last thing that I or we would recommend would be to consider a virtual, a remote, or a hybrid schedule, perhaps to expand the summer program and include more students in that summer program who maybe aren't able to get to the building, that brick and mortar setting on a regular basis throughout the summer. Spring. I'll open this up to everybody. As you're thinking about summer, maybe it's an extended school year for your students who have IEPs and who are receiving special education services. Maybe it's an intervention program, maybe it's an enrichment program. As you're thinking about what your summer program will look like in your school or in your district, what is the objective or what are the objectives of that summer program? Feel free to chat that in. Feel free to come off of mute. we're doing pretty good here as far as time is concerned, team. I'm very pleased with that. I thought for sure we'd be running right up against the 4:30 end time. Casey, anybody getting anything in the chat there?
Yes, we have a response here. Get credits completed or recovered. So that would be a credit recovery type programming, or completed. So some students may be trying to graduate early. Amanda, I'm inferring that, but that I do see that quite a bit, that some students are allowed to maybe take a class to get ahead.
Love that. Love the idea of getting kids back on track or getting them further along the track toward that finish line.
We have a family consumer science teacher mentioning, because there was some dialogue regarding interactive, whiteboards or presentation boards
sure.
for summer. So this is related to fashion design. In the Intro to Fashion class, they design clothes, shoes, accessories, and other personal items or things through the interactive whiteboard. So they're doing collaboration time in a real work-based learning type context.
That's fantastic. What a great experience for the learners, really expanding all of their experiences. And it sounds like that would be a course that would not only be very popular, but would also be very well attended, and it kind of gets them thinking about what life after high school is going to look like in a high interest area. That sounds great.
It is. I am speaking for Nidra here, but the notion to get them bought into their career path throughout the summer is connected to success in academic classes as well. So.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's a way to, Casey, I know one of your favorite terms to use is the idea of hiding the vegetables, but that's a great way to get students, to engage in school, particularly when it's a high interest sort of a course. And a lot of times that's a great motivator to then keep them going toward graduation. So like you were saying, they can be thinking about that career path, whether it's after high school, or whether it's after a college career. That's neat. All right. We'll go ahead and spring to the next. There's 3 objectives that we hear about quite a bit, and I would say that the examples that you all shared would definitely fit into these 3 categories. The idea of addressing learning loss. So that could be a credit recovery scenario, but it could also be the idea of filling gaps from previous grade levels where learning was interrupted. Perhaps it was from the pandemic, or perhaps it was from other life circumstances. Get students back on track toward graduation, so recovering credit. It could also be for any students who are rising high school students. So you may have some students coming from the middle school or the junior high as 8th graders, and they're rising 9th graders. And based on assessments that you give locally, maybe it's based on NWEA MAP scores, maybe it's based on IAR scores, REN Star is another assessment that's used throughout the state. You might realize that those rising 9th graders have gaps in their learning, and you want to make sure that you intervene and that you fill in some of those gaps before they even get off track toward graduation. And the last one would really be the one that was shared there around the concept of fashion design, really expanding student learning opportunities. And a lot of times, again, those high interest courses are great motivators to get students engaged with school. So in summertime, as Casey was mentioning, is a great time to expand learning opportunities for students. As I mentioned earlier, we definitely would encourage you to require the students and the families to commit to achieving that stated goal or objective, making sure that that goal or those goals are specific and they're attainable during whatever that time period of summer school might be. We're starting to hear a little bit more, Casey, I think you'd agree with this, we're starting to hear a little bit more about, of course, what would be considered a traditional summer school period, which might be 4, 5, 6 weeks maybe. But then we're also starting to hear a little bit about schools and districts that maybe are expanding that a little bit and giving kids opportunities perhaps to learn asynchronously, even beyond what would be considered that traditional amount of time. But bottom line is that you would want them to commit to reaching that goal in that very specific period of time. Make sure that there are plenty of opportunities for the teachers, tutors, paraprofessionals, might be other adult volunteers who are connecting with kids and forming that relationship. Make sure that they're spending time conferencing with those students so that progress toward those goals is being monitored, and extrinsically motivate as needed. You know, and that could very well be an extrinsic motivator as far as something tangible, or it could very well be something that's very much intangible. The idea of time, as an example. One of our partner districts in Kane County, up here in my neck of the woods, outside of Chicago, their summer school program, it is very much credit recovery based. And one of their motivators is the idea of time. And when that goal or those goals are achieved and those credits are recovered, they give that time back to the students, and they no longer require them to come into the summer school, into the building for summer school, which is a great motivator for them. And it allows the students to really focus in on what it is that they need to do. And then they get some of that time back. Great extrinsic motivator.
Jason, if I could piggyback on that just for one quick second,
Sure.
is especially since we've had some kind of dovetail conversations regarding workplace readiness, career-based connections, whether it's summer school or after school or what have you, learners, be it secondary students or adult learners who have jobs, employment, that the flexibility of an online interface lets he or she, they get the extended learning when it's best for them to receive it. So it could be a summer piece in which they're working, you know, spotty different hours throughout the week, and so they kind of catch as catch can, or it could be they have a full-time employment and they need to do some of these things in the evening time, which in the past would meant that they were excluded from some extended learning opportunities. So I just wanted to kind of connect some chat-based conversations with what you just said.
Casey, thank you. I have a question up there on the screen, and this really ties into the last item that I would encourage you to consider as you're thinking about summer programming. And it's the idea of offering, as Casey was just saying, offering a virtual remote or perhaps a hybrid of both, where you have the students reporting to a physical space on certain days, and then they're learning on their own from a place of their choosing on other days. Why are those being considered now? And again, why now? I wanted to share this quote with you here. The future of learning is hybrid and ubiquitous. Kids can learn anytime and everywhere. And this quote comes from the Chief Digital Equity Officer of Digital Promise, DeAndre Weaver. And really this goes along, this is perhaps one of the unintended or certainly unplanned positive consequences coming out of the pandemic and that emergency remote learning experience that we all had, which is that we did learn in education that learning can take place in a lot of different places, a lot of different times of the day, and that it can absolutely be hybrid, and that learning is taking place all over the place. This data here, 90% of families, so you not only have leaders from organizations around digital equity talking about the idea of hybrid or remote virtual learning, but families, there's an appetite for this learning environment from families. 90% of families believe that high quality virtual instruction is possible, as long as the folks who are delivering it have the right resources and the proper training. 64% of high school parents expect virtual learning options, And that's from a 2021 Education Next poll. From Education Week on the teachers' side of the table, 88% of teachers said their ability to use technology improved. And from the Titan partners, an analysis, 73% of districts plan to maintain or increase their virtual learning provider relationship post-pandemic. I'll open it up to the group here because we got a little bit of time. What is everybody's thoughts around the idea of remote, virtual, hybrid learning? And perhaps what are your thoughts just on your own ability to use technology to deliver instruction to students? Is this possible? Is there a desire for this for you locally? Feel free to chat that in. You can come off of mute.
For me, I think one of the coolest things that happened during all of the pandemic learning experiences was that teachers became less afraid to try something they hadn't tried before. And the understanding that it's okay to make a mistake, it's okay to fail forward, if you will, and to be able to learn something new is not going to be something that you have to be an expert at it coming out of the gate. I think that was one of the coolest things for teachers, is that teachers overall felt more comfortable to just try. And that's going to be something that we need to continue as we move forward.
And see what happens. Thank you, John. Yeah, thank you, John, for sharing that. We were all learning on the fly. Talk about a situation where we were all figuring it out as we, building the plane as we're flying it, as the cliche or the metaphor would say. So yes, I would, John, 100% agree with you on that people's confidence in just trying things and seeing what would work was definitely strengthened during that time.
If I can share, my name is Nidra. I'm a faculty teacher in Harvey. And one thing I got out of the pandemic, we were using like at-home items to make designs. For instance, during the time we had to wear face masks, I had them grab a sock and we made face masks from old socks or gently used socks. So things that they could use around the house to be fashionable, but yet, protect themselves while needing to wear a mask. That's my experience, and a lot of them still have their face masks.
Yeah, absolutely, Nidra. What a memory there, and certainly an experience that you gave again for the students that perhaps you didn't think that maybe you'd ever have to give them that particular experience, but certainly the idea of being resourceful and creative. What a nice memory there. Thank you, Nidra, for sharing that.
My name is Queen, and
hi, Queen.
I was at alternative school, and a lot of my kids were more successful when we went remote. With them being really into video games and things like that, some of them had no trouble navigating, and that gave them a different way of doing assignments and doing it at their own pace. And we had Chromebooks, we had a few, and we had to loan them out. A lot of the kids didn't have the technology, but I would say they were very successful. And I think it's surprised they were sometimes doing better than the teacher. And
Sure.
So it was like hands-on learning, project-based. And,
Sure.
They would share the different things that they learned. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. We were all reluctant. And, it was just a shock to go away with packets. Just trying to make packets for individual students with IEPs. That was very different. But the Google Classroom, and even though we probably weren't as advanced as most districts, it allowed you to set up different assignments for the students there. So I would like to go remote as a teacher, but sometimes I just fear the future of it, if it's going to go away. I did have to step down for a little while. I need my professional developments though, because I still want to maintain my credentials. But I see a lot of jobs like Boca, how new they are year round, but I would like to stay a virtual teacher. I would like to become one but I'm scared of the future of it. But I just don't think it's going away, because even when you think about universities, degrees online, Moodles, things like that, that adults do every day, the kids are having to do. That it was just the eye opener, the pandemic in itself.
Queen, thank you for coming off of mute and sharing your experiences and your thoughts on that. I would absolutely agree with you that virtual learning is going to persist. It's going to continue, and I think that it's going to continue. Again, this is me speaking. I think that my opinion, but I think that it's going to continue at a lot of different ages. And to your point from before, students, particularly students, probably mid to later elementary up into middle and high school are very comfortable interacting through the use of a webcam or chat functionality, and they're able to absolutely get what it is that they need from a learning standpoint in that particular arena. And I think that it's because of that that I agree with you that that virtual learning is going to continue to have a place. So just thinking about and kudos to you, in your interest in being a virtual teacher. I would say that, and Casey, I think you'd agree with me also on this, and Rachel and Craig too. But we're starting to hear more about the idea of local school districts having their own virtual school with their own teachers who are working with kids remotely. So that is something that we're very much at the bottom of that hill or that mountain, but we are starting to hear a little bit about it. So Queen, kudos to you for your interest in that.
Okay, thank you.
This is Jeanette. I think that with the virtual learning, it would also have homebound students feel more inclusive into our school communities.
Yeah.
Keeps them integrated into it.
Jeanette, thank you for sharing. And Jeanette, that brings me to another point that I wanted to connect to what Queen was saying before too. There were students who were extremely successful in that initial shutdown, post March 2020. And I would say that, that the idea of virtual learning, it may not work for 100% of the students, but it could work for, as to Jeanette's point, it could work for 10% of the students. And it might really allow for that 10% of those students to persist toward graduation, which is really what we're all in this to help the kids accomplish. Earn that high school diploma locally from their local home school.
And I'm in Macomb, Illinois, and the age group was 6th, 7th, and 8th. I was a self-contained classroom. So the middle school, so 12,
Sure.
13, 14-ish. And they
Sure.
did great.
All right. Well, I think we're getting close. Oh.
Jason, I was going to kind of connect a theme in the chat. There's continued to be some real positive conversation regarding hands-on nature classes, and that could be because they're career-based or they just, the focus of the class is something that's more practical-based. And so you said earlier, Jason, that I often use the term hide the vegetables. The idea in that is that students love their hands-on classes. That's their favorite class to be a part of. So if the extended learning experience is embedded in that, i.e. a rotation within that part of the day on the computer where there perhaps is a more stable internet connection, because that was another conversation over here in the chat, is that the communities themselves don't always have one-to-one quality internet connections, but the learning center, wherever that is, tends to, so that if that extended learning rotation inside a hands-on learning class or experience, each student is, when they go through the rotation, is guaranteed a time to experience those pieces. Those are individualized or personalized based on their needs as an individual student, but that's those vegetables that are hidden into it. So you want to get it certified in OSHA, you want to get a certificate towards family consumer science. There are certain reading, math, problem solving skills, so on, that you need to have practiced and demonstrated and I mean this in a positive way, that resembles what we did when we were in kindergarten. Remember that? You had station learning. We were using our hands a lot. The best secondary and adult learning hands-on facilities look like kindergarten classrooms with all the bells and whistles, just huge kindergartners going around in those rotations. That's where they're passionate about learning, and then that's where they're also getting individualized activities. So thanks for visualizing huge kindergartners with me.
Yeah, I love the concept of huge kindergartners. That's something I think we can all wrap our arms around. A few more points that are up there on the screen, and then we're going to wrap things up here because we're getting close to the end of the hour. But just again, some of the benefits, and we've been talking about these here over the last 5 minutes or so, but the idea of having a virtual remote or a hybrid summer program could then build momentum into having a local virtual school during the school year. Students learn where, when they prefer. Students can get ahead of the game, as we were talking about earlier. Toward graduation, they can earn credits in maybe classes that aren't offered locally by your certified teachers, or maybe that are offered locally, but the students involved in other courses or other activities which consume periods for them during the traditional school day. And you can expand your course catalog, give kids the experience of a successful online course, of completing a course online, which, as we were all just talking about a minute ago here, as we see so many adults who are learning remotely, learning virtually to their own professional development, the idea of giving say high school or middle school students a successful experience can create a foundation for success later on in life, so that they know that they can be successful in that environment. We've had a lot of conversation here throughout the hour. I'll certainly open it up to questions for anyone here. Also up here on the screen, we have a resources page, and we'll make sure that we share this slide deck with John as a PDF so that you all have access to that. And then these links, these hyperlinks, will all be live. A couple of resources that I wanted to point out to you. One was the Unlocking Time website that Craig referenced during his portion of our presentation here today. This is the story and video that Rachel referenced during her portion from the Tennessee Boys and Girls Club. We have the idea of accelerating student learning with high dosage tutoring. That was something that Casey referred to during his portion as he was talking about low ratio time. And then I really want to point everybody here to our company blog. This is just a sampling of the posts that we thought would be particularly applicable to our time with you here today. But I would definitely encourage you to subscribe to the blog, and then you'll get daily posts, daily emails from us as we put up those posts on a daily basis. John, I know we're here at the end of the time. Are there any questions here before we wrap it up?